the stack is pretty long because we haven't done this for a couple of weeks. So
Yeah, I bet.
four, three, two, one. All right. Welcome this morning. This is our usual Friday morning live stream where we are answering questions from the Bridges of Meaning Discord. We are streaming live from the world headquarters of Livingstone's Estuary, Sacramento, California, just outside the great California Delta. And we haven't done this for 2 weeks, so Rick and I are a little rusty. Um, and but it should be okay. The last question I see goes back to December 16, and a few other questions have come alongside. We probably won't put through all the typed questions today. So I think we'll, as we usually do, I intersperse questions from the typed Discord list to questions of people in the room. So if you're in the room this morning and you want to ask a question, you'll probably get a chance to ask a question. And part of the reason I do this on Discord is so that we can talk to each other instead of me just answering questions. So I'm trying to see if we're live. Yeah, we are live. Good. All right. Rick is us all set up. I don't want to look at that screen because I'll confuse myself. Let's start with, well, let me just make sure we have, well, maybe this morning, just because why not? Is there a live question that someone would like to ask to just to get us going out of the gate?
I've got one if no one else does.
No, go for it, Daniel.
So C.S. Lewis has like 30 books or something like that. So I'm uh kind of halted at where to start with him. See, it's
Okay.
start from this first, like the first book you wrote, go from there, or what's your advice on that?
I wouldn't do that. Tell me what kinds of books you like to read.
Those kind.
Rick, what's going on, Rick? Where's Joey?
What do I like to read? I like psychology books, psychoanalysis, philosophy.
Okay, I would recommend starting with Screw Tape Letters.
Okay. I
Screw
think my
Tape
mom actually
Letters,
has a copy of that.
good. Screw Tape Letters was one of his earlier books, and it's very penetrating psychologically in terms of, so it's a story of an uncle demon mentoring his nephew in
Mhm.
how to trap humans. So it's very psychological. It's a favorite of Lewis in many ways. It sort of put him on the map for a certain reading audience, and that would be a good book to begin with.
Mhm.
Um,
I've
and
started it before.
oh, okay. Well, we'll try it again. See if it fits you now better. If you
Yeah.
like novels, I think his obviously his children's books are fairly easy to read, and because they're children's books. If you like novels, Till We Have Faces is philosophical, it's psychological, and I think it's his best piece of fiction. So those would be my recommendations. Anybody else from the who's in the voice chat have any recommendations for Daniel about where to start with Lewis?
Mere Christianity. I think
That's
that's a good intro to Lewis.
Yep, yep.
The Weight
It's
of Glory is pretty good too.
Yeah, one of the things you'll discover with Lewis books is that he was an essayist. So many of the books are actually compilations of essays.
Mhm.
So you can something like Weight of Glory is really a book of essays, and it's a terrific sermon that he gave. And then there's other good essays. There is on Audible a collection of C.S. Lewis essays, which is, especially if you have an Audible subscription, it's just one credit, and it's got a ton of C.S. Lewis essays in in audiobook, and that's I go back to that thing quite often. You can
Mhm.
find a PDF out on the internet of where the essays can be found in written form because there's no book companion to that list of essays, but that list of essays in auditory form is a real bargain. And so that's a lot of Lewis's stuff is now an audiobook, which is really helpful too if you like that kind of thing. So,
Yeah, I love audiobooks.
all right. Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you for the answer.
All right, let's maybe jump into Julian's question. I don't even remember if I answered this because it's been a couple of weeks. Is Pageau suggesting a return to traditional society slash traditional worldview, or offering a new postmodernism that has gone through the fires of modernity and postmodernity? Is a pure traditionalism tenable or desirable? Picking back here on Charles Taylor's A Secular Age, the basic argument is that we cannot help but be secular. So, what does Christianity look like in a secular age? Traditional without being traditionalist, modern without being modernist. Um, I think Julian and I are probably barking up the same tree here because I I think I should probably have a conversation with Jonathan about this because when I listen to him, I he's not a Luddite in that he thinks he's not Amish, and so what makes this so interesting is that Julian is a Hutterite. So Julian is cousins with the Amish in terms of the church history family tree. And so this question for Julian makes a lot of sense and is a pretty important one. But that tension is very much in Pageau's work. I think he's I was actually reading some of his brother's book and was thinking about doing a little video even just on the first page of his book because right away things popped up to mind. Can the question Julian is really asking here is can you go back again? And I think the answer is no. And I think the answer is we shouldn't try to go back. Well, that's I'm not even quite sure about that answer. Even if you try to go back again, you won't because we can't unlearn what we already know. And I think that's what Julian's getting at in terms of how we how we manage tradition. Here on the Bridges of Meaning Discord, Orthodox Christianity has become quite popular, and many are seeking out and looking for Orthodox churches that they can join and become a part of. And I'm thrilled with that. I'm happy about that. I was talking to my council last night and saying, I mean, they're for the church people that have no experience here, how on earth can they get their mind around what's happening here? And I think for many people, you would say, well, Paul's job is to bring new people into the Christian Reformed Church. While I'd love to see people come into the Christian Reformed Church as a consequence of what I'm doing online, I don't know that it's going to happen. So we're going to have a lot of people going into Orthodox churches. And part of the reason I asked Bern Power the questions I did about the Orthodox churches that he's around in Tbilisi, Georgia, is Jonathan Pageau and any, I'm sort of referring to y'all now as bridgers. It was at the Bridges of Meaning Discord, and all of you bridgers who are, checking out orthodoxy and getting involved and finding priests. And I mentioned to someone recently how I was driving around and I noticed there was a strip mall, and in the strip mall there was sort of a strip mall style church. And if you've been around strip malls enough, you kind of know what strip mall style churches are. And then there was an Orthodox church right next to the strip mall style church. And I thought, orthodoxy in a rented space in a strip mall. That's sort of where we're at. And now, obviously, once Orthodox churches get to the size and scale where they can do all their stuff with architecture and icons and commission Jonathan Pageau to do carvings for the walls, in a lot of places in North America, that's going to be a while. And Orthodoxy is going to look like a strip mall church where you're walking past and you see that these people have tried to decorate their space and they've got an icon up in front and you've got someone there in vestments and you've got metal chairs and people dressed like people off the street and they're doing church in a rented commercial space. That's where we're at. Okay. And so Jonathan, and actually, I have mentioned this before to Jonathan, and he's agreed. Jonathan and all the other evangelicals who are entering the Orthodox movement in America don't just shed their evangelical roots or their, Jonathan Pageau is on YouTube, for Pete's sake. It is, I know Carl, who has recently, many of you know who Carl is in the comment section, and I love Carl, and Carl's been high on me and Carl's been down on me, but that's absolutely okay. And Carl finds me hopeless in some ways because I have thus far been resistant to seeing the world exactly how he does. But if you've watched Carl in the comment section, you know that his frustration he shares quite readily with everyone who doesn't see the world the way he does. But one of the things that really annoyed Carl was when I said we're all postmodernists, basically following Charles Taylor. And no, I'm not a postmodernist, but the thing about a premodernist is you're naively so. And I was reading a book on women in the early church in the Roman Empire. Choice was not a value in that context like it is for us. Just look at how choice and identity have come together in our world. Now, in the Roman Empire, you as a woman or a man gained status with honor. But in a way, you embrace the world naively. And I don't mean naively pejoratively. I mean it that it's uncomplicated. It's simply as you see it. Now, on one level, we all view the world naively because naive is sort of synonymous with as it is or as I see it. But in this postmodern age, it really, in some ways, the Protestant Reformation had a big part of this. Now, suddenly, we choose it. Once the church is no longer assumed, but rather chosen, and in our culture, chosen as a consumer, it's different than if you're a cradle Orthodox or cradle Catholic or cradle frozen chosen in the Christian Reformed Church. So you cannot, I'm going to post probably early next week a really wonderful conversation with a guy from the Fresno meetup who I had met a couple times at the Fresno meetup, and he was able to grab a slot. And it's just as a Christian pastor, it's the kind of conversations that you dream of having. And so I'll be posting that early next week. And he was deconstructing from he was raised in the Assemblies of God Church and sort of been all over evangelicaldom, and now he has found some peace in um, a Ukrainian, I don't know if they're Orthodox or Catholic, which rite they use. I mean, that gets so complicated. Protestants looking out at all that stuff, kind of, which little group are you? But anyway, it's a traditional, liturgical, sacramental immigrant congregation, and so he's really found a home there, and that's been living water to his soul. But he comes to it with a history. And so, no, I think Julian's point is right. Now, is Pageau suggesting, or yeah, but he's also embodying and living, and those who are following him are doing the same thing. So that's why I I laughed so hard when Rationality Rules sort of intimated that he didn't think that Jonathan Pageau was one of these guys who quote unquote believed in God. I mean, I almost fell off my chair when I heard that, because and it's not Stephen Woodford's fault. He doesn't know Jonathan as much as even I know Jonathan, who doesn't know Jonathan very well. But that's sort of how we are in a deeply pluralist society when we meet people who have radically different worldviews, whose worldviews are nearly unimaginable to others of us. And in such a context, we all sort of take on a posture of postmodernity, and we look at each other and we sort of every time you look at a new human being, most of what you see is projection. Peterson talked about that beautifully in his conversation with Roger Scruton. Most of what we see is projection. And bit by bit by bit over time, the real person underneath the projection becomes apparent. And this is part of what happens when you fall in love. In many ways, you fall in love with yourself. You fall in love with the projection you place on the canvas of another human being. So when I watch people migrating to orthodoxy, again, I celebrate that. I mean, the goal of this entire effort is very much a C.S. Lewis mere Christianity effort. I want people to get into the hallway, and what room they take off the hallway, God bless you. Once you're in one of the rooms off the hallway of mere Christianity, you're under the authority and within the domain of the Orthodox or the Catholics or the Baptists or the mega church or whatever room you land in. Okay, but I'm around enough to know, and I know my own room well enough that no room is perfect and all rooms have their thing. So anyone who's been through the hallway is in that sense touched by postmodernity, because the hallway, the mere Christianity hallway, is a deeply postmodern room that says that we can choose a door. Now, this is where some of my Calvinism trips in, and you ask, well, do you choose a door? Does the door choose you? And that dynamic is always with us. So, no, Julian, I agree. And this is, people are often, well, Paul, when are you going to join the Roman Catholic Church? And my answer to that is, well, when is the Christian Reformed Church going to end its protest? Because I'm a child of my room, and I'm a pretty stick in the mud loyalist too. I'm the product of Jews and Frisians, two of the most stubborn people in all of human history. So, um, but at some point, even without changing rooms, I became a postmodern Christian Reformed person. Now, again, lest someone say, Carl, Vanderclay was talking about you. And Carl, you have to understand anything I say about you is said in love, because I certainly do care about you, and even I kind of miss you in the comment section in your own sea monster estuary way. But to be Protestant is in some ways to, even if you wind up in the same room, when you do confession of faith in the Christian profession of faith in the Christian Reformed Church, you sort of go into the hallway and you come back in and say, okay, I choose this room. And someone might say, really kind of the room chose you. So great question, Julian. Any follow-ups or comments on that? I hope I didn't insult or discourage any of you in the room this morning.
I think I have something to ask, just on expanding on that, if that's okay.
Sure.
It was to do with, you were saying that you can't unlearn.
Yeah.
Is forgetting or the failure to be taught the same as that? Because it seems that in, say, certain cultural revolutions where it's been successful in removing anything that came before, that unlearning does seem possible.
That's a good point. That's a good point. I would say that to forget is not to unlearn, or to one of the things. So I was doing a little poking and trolling on Twitter yesterday, and you bump up to people, and one of the things that
None of us are
yeah,
perfect.
yeah, but I do my poking and trolling sometimes just to try to invite people into better conversation. And so it gets attention. And that's a lot of what some of that stuff is. And you should do it with care, and probably it's not. I don't always do it with wisdom, but there it is. So and one of the things that now that I'm in my mid 50s, I have to recognize is that someone in their 20s, basically the age of my kids, they haven't uh, they haven't had time. They haven't seen what I've seen. And so to be young and idealistic and want to change the world, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Now, Uncle Jordan Peterson says, put your own house in order before you, he says perfect order. I think it's pushing it a little far. Put your own house in order before you go out and try to change the rest of the world. And yeah, he's right. Point taken. But to be young is to see. Oh, Ike. Well, thank you, Ike. You're our first super chat. Well, look at that. Ike Ike has visited this church even on a Sunday, and so I've had a chance to shake hands with Ike before COVID. So thanks, Ike, for the super chat. We've never had one before. Um, anyway, Rick just came in and handed me a note. But to get back to your question, every generation, if you read the Hebrew scriptures, if you read the Old Testament, there's a big emphasis on train the young, tell them the story. Remember, look at the Seder, how much education is in all of that. That's a burden that every generation has to the next. And so I don't know, for a lot of people, if it's so much forgetting as if they don't remember the Cold War. They don't remember they don't remember growing up watching propaganda TV of the West, looking at empty shelves in the East. It was probably true. But as you get to know, once the Berlin Wall came down, um, uh, the people of the East began to tell their stories, and in some ways the coming of orthodoxy to America is a result of the Cold War. All these layers are intertwined. I don't know if I'm answering your question, Chris, or if you want to follow up.
I think you've kind of tied me in knots a little bit there.
Okay. That's okay.
I'm not sure how to follow that.
No, that's all right. That's all right. Okay. Anybody else had anything they wanted to get in there?
I would just like to add that the future is built in part from out of the past,
Mm.
and that Christianity does have a common ground tradition which all Christians can look back to, which is Judaism. And then also Carl is back and and wished my damnation in the comments.
Okay. Thank you, Nate. Thank you, Nate. Nate certainly has been back and forth with Carl on a number of things. And, early on when Carl came in, I'd get emails from people asking me to ban him from the comments. I'm very, very reluctant to ban anyone. I think an estuary needs to have some sea monsters in it, because if you haven't swum with if you don't swim with sea monsters, you won't know how to navigate the bigger world. So let the sea
Al-
monsters in. Yeah, go ahead, Luke.
Also, the estuary needs a good ass hat, which I think is what Carl. That's his term of endearment for myself.
Oh, okay.
And or Julian.
we need to love our trolls. We need to love our trolls. So, all right, Dave W. To piggyback on Julian's question, if something new, a new postmodernism, as Julian said, were to arise out of modernity, postmodernity, that could somehow still attempt integration with the tradition of the previous centuries, I think that's what we're always doing. And if this is something that you believe could be a positive development within Christianity, what do you personally believe that would or should look like? I think that, at the risk of sounding terribly Hegelian, I think that's a lot of what's happening now. Why at this stage? And Pageau said a number of times, if I were doing this 5 years ago or 10 years ago, nobody would have understood. The time was ripe. Why? Because in some ways, modernity has been in decline for over 100 years, and it's going to continue to decline. But modernity brought forth rich fruit that we are all benefiting from, but had tremendous liabilities. Postmodernity, now, part of the difficulty with all these words are that we don't have better labels that are more precise. The dissolving solvent aspect of postmodernity that looked at modernity and basically said, you can't have a monarchical vision. You have an agenda. In some ways, postmodernity looks at modernity and says, you're a pattern seeing patterns, which is exactly what Pageau has said. And when Pageau said that, just lights came on for me. You're a pattern looking at patterns. And when Jonathan Pageau said that, he was being enormously postmodern. And I know Carl has left Camp Vanderklay and gone to Camp Pageau, and I thought, oh boy, that'll be an interesting combination. But because, to get back to Julian's point, in some ways, Jonathan Pageau is astoundingly postmodern, because he recognizes we're patterns seeing patterns. But where there's truth, I mean, hard truth transcends all of these, what to call them, waves, regimes, paradigms. And so when Pageau says we're patterns seeing patterns, Pageau can say, I'm reading Maximus the Confessor. I'm reading Church Fathers. The Church Fathers knew this. Were the Church Fathers postmodern? Or maybe they saw some of the truths that postmodernists see. Now, if you are totally consumed by the hermeneutic of suspicion and say it's all patterns seeing patterns and the patterns don't see through to anything, well, then you've lost your way. And then, in a sense, that's another view on what John Vervaeke has called the meaning crisis. That's all these things come together in some of these ways. So the way forward will continue to integrate, and Nate said it very well. We are accumulating from the past. So and also Chris's question was excellent. We forget the past, or it was introduced to us, but we never learned it. We never knew it. And it's sort of that deep yada Hebrew way of knowing. When Adam knows Eve and they conceive a child, that kind of knowing you can connect over to consummation. Okay. So the language of the end of this story, this chapter in this human story, when Christ returns for a second time, is called consummation. Why do we use that same word when we say they consummated the marriage? Because the consummation of the marriage is the consummation of this epic of the story. It's the consummation of heaven and earth. It's the consummation of Jesus and his bride. So it's all of that coming together. And so what we're going to do, and again, this is why the pattern that I see of Bridgers being interested in orthodoxy, I recognize this because I've been watching this pattern in church planting over the last 20 years. Church planting in the 1980s and 90s was all about, finding some former rock star who went through rehab but can really play the guitar well and now wants to sing on a stage with bright lights and a smoke machine singing love songs to Jesus, and get a preacher who can preach wisdom literature with contemporary movies and put them up there in skinny jeans and get an auditorium that looks like a junior college. And in the 1980s and 1990s, that was the seeker movement. You've got Rick Warren, you've got Bill Hybels, and they created a safe space for a dangerous message. And so my friend Kevin Adams up at Granite Springs Church up in Rockland, when he came to Sacramento, that's how he planted his church. But if you've watched the evolution of Granite Springs Church, now there are people who go in that church who are raised Greek Orthodox, and well, they're a little bit American now, and they're living in a Sacramento suburb, so they're rather consumerist. But Granite Springs Church now has, they won't call them icons because they're a Christian Reformed church, but they've got art on the walls, and they have weekly communion, and they have all of this stuff that my grandparents would have looked at and said, that's Romanish or that's papist, basically echoing the language of Luther and Calvin and the Protestant Reformation. Well, why are the children of iconoclasts now getting icon curious? It's happening. It's happening. What we're as this, when I talk to Brett Anderson, I talked, here's an image, here's a metaphor of humanity. We're this giant computational machine that is slowly processing and moving towards the consummation, the marriage of heaven and earth. And so that the church is continuing to process. I remain a Protestant. I think the much needed protest that arose in Europe because of some of the corruption that had happened in the Western church, we're processing that. And now that the Berlin Wall is down and some of the riches of the Eastern church are available in North America, that's being integrated into it. So the answer to your first question, Dave, is what does it look like? It looks like what it looks like. It looks like the conversations you're seeing on the Bridges of Meaning Discord. It looks like Jonathan Pageau. It also looks like, the stuff that's going on in the Vervaeke Awakening from the Meaning Crisis Discord. It looks like this weird, messy, boundaryless estuary where we're meeting strange fish, and human beings are really strange fish, as the transformers among us will notice, that we can transform much more than dogs or cats or horses or cows. We're at the point now when people with penises are saying I'm a woman, and people with vaginas are saying I'm a man. Human beings are the most plastic shapeshifters that we have on the planet. So here in the estuary, in terms of our religious identities, People are trying on new clothes. Now, I'm riffing on the Apostle Paul there because that is the metaphor that the Apostle Paul uses for clothe yourself with Christ. Well, who is Christ and how big is Christ? Well, Christ spans between heaven and earth. He, goes from top to bottom, as Pageau likes to note. He connects heaven and earth. He is the bridge. He is the way. He is the truth. He is the life. I mean, all of this stuff comes together. So the answer to your first question, Dave, is what does it look like? It's looking like you. It's looking like what you're seeing. Now, it'll look different in different places too, but you are working through the the Protestant Reformation. Now, the Protestant Reformation kicked up against the Western Church. And to follow someone's story like Nathan Jacobs, I mean, he went to my alma mater, Calvin Seminary, and got a PhD there, and then went Orthodox. I don't know what his former professors think of that, but we're sort of at a stage right now where I doubt they're too terribly far from me. If sure, they'd like to see him join the Christian Reformed Church or maybe teach at Calvin Seminary or maybe teach art at Calvin College, something like that. But at the same time, they see him as an individual. Now we're bringing Petersonian values in there. They see him as an individual, and they see that his communion with the Orthodox Church is contributing to him getting his life in order, and there's rest from his soul. And so they might say, "Yeah, I'd rather have you in my tribe because you're tremendously gifted and an asset." But um, you know, Team CRC and Team Orthodox and Team Roman Catholic, we're all part of Team Jesus and we're all part of the body of Christ. And that's something that my grandparents and would have had a hard time saying for their own reason. And it's something that, frankly, a lot of Christians in Latin America today can't say. But the Roman Catholic Church that many evangelicals in Latin Americas have to deal with is very different from the Roman Catholic Church that that I relate to here in North America. So zip code matters. I'll keep reading your question, Dave. Owen Barfield says that we can no longer participate in reality in the way we originally did, but must move on to some sort of final participation. Yet the culmination of this participation for him seems to be found in the Eucharist, which precedes the breakdown of original participation. So I guess I'm asking how, if at all, you might believe a sort of old yet new form of participation could be brought about within Christianity after the Enlightenment, modernism, postmodernism, and what you think that might be. Again, look around you. It's happening, but you want to see it on a scale that you can, now we're getting at the Vervaeke language here, that you can get your arms around, that you can grasp. You are too small. And that's why we use the word participation. I am too small. We are all too small. All of this is way beyond us. So so you've got initial participation, loss of participation, final participation. It's sort of like the day of the Lord in Scripture. Why do I say that? I often, when I talk about the day of the Lord in Scripture, the day of the Lord comes about in the book of Joel, and there's this vision of, are they Babylonian armies or are they grasshoppers? The day of the Lord becomes a recurrent theme in the Old Testament prophets. The day of the Lord came when the Babylonians came down and destroyed the temple. The day of the Lord came when the Maccabean revolt kicked out the Greeks. The day of the Lord came when Jesus was crucified on the cross. The day of the Lord came when Jesus rose out of the tomb. A day of the Lord might come to you when you go to the doctor and he says you've got cancer. A day of the Lord came to America on January 6th this year when Trump supporters stormed the Capitol building. The day of the Lord will come to Livingstone's church when its current iteration closes. That's the day of the Lord. The day of the Lord is the consummation. It's a day of loss, and it's a day of, let's imagine two virgins consummating their wedding on their wedding night. There's loss there. Their virginity is lost. A degree of innocence is lost, but there's also foundness there. And these dualities sort of come together. And now, initial participation, loss of participation, and final participation, you see that's not just one long stream that goes from Genesis 1 to Revelation 21. That's one arc, but these arcs are nested. And so you can see this Barfieldian process happening on huge arcs, like the whole story of this dispensation, of this chapter of the world. Oh my goodness, we have another super chat. Alex, thank you. We have this whole arc, which is the whole dispensation. We have the arc of our lives. The day of the Lord is the day you were born. The day of the Lord is the day you die. Those are all days of the Lord. And so all of these little days of the Lord I call pre-echoes. Well, what is an echo? If you go into a canyon and yell or clap your hands, you hear an echo. And temporally, the echo is after the Big Bang, as it were. The Big Bang is coming. And so every day of the Lord that we experience now is chronologically reversed from a normal echo. That's why it's a pre-echo. It's a pre-echo of the day of the Lord. So when Jesus says something like, and again, there's so many things in scripture that I read sometimes and my mind is just blown because I don't know why they didn't stone Jesus right then and there. And I know there's plenty of stories in the gospel where Jesus says something and people pick up rocks because if you understand anything of when he was living and what they believed, the thing that he just said is utter blasphemy. It completely undoes their worldview. And that's why they say, we know Moses and you should die. And Jesus says, if you really knew Moses, you would follow me. So Jesus says, it's not what you put in your mouth that makes you unclean. When Jesus says that is a classic Barfieldian moment when it's a total loss of participation. Jesus completely deconstructs the entire clean, unclean, holy, common, profane construction of Moses in that saying. And it's what he does. And it's a loss of participation. But then he stands up and says to his disciples, this is my body broken for you. Well, it's final participation. And so Jesus brings us through those cycles. And when Tom Holland writes Dominion and talks about, renovare and reformations and all of this stuff, and he sees this dynamic when he notes that the early European missionaries cut down Odin's tree and basically dared the spirits come after me. You have the seeds of secularism there. And so what's happening in Christianity via Jesus and in the story of the world that Barfield picks up on is this continual process of enchantment, disenchantment, re-enchantment. That's another language to put on it. And we are in that process now. And so we have the little cycles and then we have the bigger cycles. And it seems to me, I just noted, Josh Topolsky wrote a blog post this morning. Josh Topolsky was one of the founders of The Verge. And I listen to a lot of tech podcasts. And so I keep my eye on Josh Topolsky. Josh Topolsky asked Elon Musk the question of the simulation. Josh Topolsky this morning, after watching the storming of the Capitol, in Washington, D.C. says, we're coming to the end of the simulation. Well, it's Josh Topolsky noting we're coming to the end of a cycle. Now, which cycle are we in? Because the destruction of Jerusalem was the end of a cycle. The rebuilding of the temple under Cyrus, Cyrus and the sending the refugees back, that was a beginning of a cycle. We are reaching the end of a cycle, and within human history, there have been many such cycles. Donald Trump and the chaotic man that he was, the president of the United States, incited the storming of the Capitol building. Think about that. Jonathan Pageau, I made a tweet basically, who predicted this? And somebody found, here's an Israeli journalist that actually in end of December said, keep an eye on that day when they seal the Electoral College and Pence reads that, because Donald Trump could tell everybody to march over to the Capitol and who knows what will happen. And then someone said, oh, don't worry, the Capitol Police, they'll be able to handle that. Well, we all know the answer to that, don't we? So, and then someone tweeted back, said, Jonathan Pageau said 2021 is going to be crazier than 2020. We're not 10 days into this year. So, but what cycle is this in? And so when, shall we call them activists or protesters, or what label shall we put on them? When someone with a MAGA hat is sitting in Nancy Pelosi's office reading her email or reading her mail, what are we to call that? That's suddenly we're face to face with an enchantment that we didn't know we had. And it's disenchantment and it's wizardry. It's, it's all of those things happening at once. And so this Barfieldian cycle that we are always in the midst of, in some ways, everyone's deconstruction. And so again, I was mentioning Mick, who I had the conversation with that I'll post early next week. Mick's reconstruction, or he calls it his renovation, because he says, I never left Christ, but it's renovare, which was a Dallas Willard operation. I've been renovated now, and now I'm going to a sacramental liturgical church, and it's water for my soul. And I can, in some ways, I can rest in the arms of Jesus that I couldn't do anymore with former rock stars in skinny jeans and smoke machines. So this process just goes and goes and goes and goes, but we don't know at what level of the Russian nesting doll, we don't know what level of the nested cycle we are in. So obviously when the Trump rally stormed the Capitol, well, there's something significant. We all know it's significant. What will it mean? Well, you're going to find pundits and blogs and chatterers and YouTubers trying to figure out what it means continually until we get another big bump. And the bumps are going to keep coming, and then they'll slow down. And that's the way the world works, as Pageau nicely notes. So, yeah, it's Barfield was very much onto something. He noticed a pattern that you can find within church history. And if Tom Holland is right, it is in some ways sort of a dynamo that powers not just church history, but is powering political history. So when I was sort of poking at this person on Twitter who wanted to say, well, look at all those Trump people and their Christianity. Christianity was used by white supremacists and by oppressors. And I said, yeah, so was language, so was flags, so was dogs. And the person said, dogs were never used by white supremacy. And so I'm old enough to remember pictures of people who marched with Martin Luther King Jr. and dogs were put on them. Dogs are used and but this is how history is. And this pattern that Barfield noted that we're all watching and being part of right now, this is how, again, to use Pageauian language, this is how history lays itself out. And the reason, Jonathan Pageau is sort of inscrutable to many people. And, when Jonathan went out to have a talk with Adam and to have a talk with Stephen Woodford, and some of us were listening to it, and we could kind of understand both sides and see that, well, communication wasn't going real well, kind of because we've lived on both sides. And it's for that reason, to get back to Julian's initial question, Pageau knows evangelicals. Pageau knows secularity. And this point sounds like something that you might expect a critical theory person to make. The underclass always knows the overclass better than the overclass knows the underclass. The slaves of antebellum Southerners knew their masters very well. They had to. Their survival depended on it. The masters didn't know the slaves very well at all. So that's always the dynamic of overclass and underclass. And so standpoint epistemology has its validity. All this postmodern stuff is not just tripe. There are valid points deep within it. Now, it doesn't mean that once you see those points, you can just go off and imagine, oh, I see the pattern. I can go fix the world. No, the world, you don't know how large the world is and how small we are. And which is why, when Jordan Peterson started intimating God number one, the Arenic God, that light started coming on for people. Oh, is that what that word means? Yeah, that's what that word means. That's what that word has always meant. It's just people forgot about it when God became a divine genie who was going to help you find parking spaces and help your grandma get over cancer. This is a very, very long story, and most people are, although because they might have an MA or a PhD, imagine themselves educated. One of the things that we're doing in education, which Jordan Peterson decried, was we're not teaching them anything about the past, because if you want to be part of the big cycles, you're going to have to study big history. And I think it's for that reason that a lot of big history is becoming popular now, whether it's Yuval Harari or Tom Holland. These books are big history, because it's only if you look at big history and you recognize the patterns and the cycles, you can begin to get a sense that we're at the end of a cycle and the beginning of another. Now, is it the end of the big cycle? The New Testament talks about we're in the latter days, and that language has obviously been picked up many, many times, and picked up in the 19th centuries by millennials. So the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. That language is intriguing. And so, yes, we're in the end times, we're in the latter days, but we've been in it for 2,000 years. So that should give us a sense of perspective. But yeah, when the Trump rally storms the Capitol building, well, now we've got your attention. So, all right, so there's enough riffing and preaching for me. Anybody in the voice chat want to jump in?
I don't know if I could even begin to compress all the many things that made me think of. But I'll just limit it to just one thing that occurred to me, which is that the fundamental reason, informed by both my Christianity and my reading of René Girard, that we can't return to original participation is that original participation was a possession. And that's why we can't return to original participation. And I would also say that
now, when you say possession, I think I know what you mean, but open that up a little bit, because I think most people are going to miss it. That was an ideological possession. Is that what you're saying? Put it in Petersonian terms?
No, I mean a possession by principalities and powers, because
Okay.
the
You're putting it in Pauline terms.
yeah, correct, exactly, yeah. No, I mean it in possession by principalities and powers. So the participation was not with there was participation, but it wasn't participation in God, not the God of the Bible.
Principality and powers is so much better than ideological possession. Way deeper. way better.
Well, you're dealing with the Apostle Paul, our friend Jacob notwithstanding. So,
This also connects to like the Reformation, when the Reformation should end, how the differences between different parts of Christianity and Judaism revolve around this. What is the proper relationship with the state, and what is the proper relationship to the kingdom and the state? So I couldn't even begin. That made me think of a lot of things, is the bottom line, and I couldn't begin to expound on all of them.
well, good. Well, and Nate, Nate had a great conversation with want to promote some of the other channels here. The Randos United. Nate had a great appearance on Randos United. So yeah, Nate's a deep thinker, and anybody who reads him in the comment section, Carl notwithstanding, Nate knows a lot, and he's a very valued member of this community. So thanks, Nate. Anybody else from the voice chat want to jump in here?
Yeah. Hey, Paul. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you fine. Oh, Dave.
Yeah,
Okay,
this is
good.
Dave. Yeah. I asked the question. I have no idea what your answer was because I just joined the chat.
Well, it's recorded, so you'll get to hear it.
Yeah. I'll go back and listen to it, but I'm sure it was awesome. But I would just
It
like
was
to
long.
say, yeah. I just heard the thing about original participation. It's something I've been thinking about a lot, and I personally don't think there's anything wrong with original participation. I just have become convinced that we can't return to it.
Right. And
so that would be my only thought.
right. And that's exactly what Julian's question was, as you noted. It's the same dynamic.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah,
But
Julian and I actually
we don't have another. Wait, I don't want to spend another half hour on it now, though. So I just
okay, all right.
But it's a great question.
All right. Yeah, all right. Thanks, Paul.
All right.
I wanted to mention something.
Yeah, go ahead, Daniel.
Backing up like 45 minutes, you've gone through a lot of topics, but you mentioned Peterson said something about projection, how we don't see through our projections until after a while. But I think it's important to note that a lot of the times we never see through or see past our projections. It's there's a quote by Marie Louise von Franz, which was one of Jung's compatriots, I guess you could call her. She says, "Unless we are possessed of an unusual degree of self-awareness, we shall never see through our projections, but must always succumb to them."
Yeah.
And that's from Projection or Recollection, her book.
Yeah, that's a great quote. And then you have to ask, where do our projections come from? I mean, that's where do those projections come from? And Nate's earlier comment, they come from the accumulation and the formation of centuries and centuries. You inherited a first draft, a biological first draft, first drafts of many of the things you needed in order to live in this world. Those projections, we project those first drafts out onto the world. But you got to start somewhere. You need a draft to start with. And this again gets into Peterson's conversations with Sam Harris. I mean, that first conversation, Peterson just kept trying to insist to Sam Harris, we start from first drafts. Modernity likes to imagine we start with no draft. And Peterson's like, no, can't be done. You don't see the world directly. You don't have a monarchical vision. You can't see the world from no place. You see it through your first drafts, and you project your first drafts out onto the world, and maybe other things will peek through.
And not all projections are created equal.
No, they are not.
Right.
No, they are not. So, great.
Kind of like this collective imagination kind of informs our projections in a way.
Yep.
our past experiences, maybe even our ancestors' past experiences.
Yep. Yep.
Cool.
And it's all in there. And that was, that was really the brilliance of Jung, that he could connect the outside story and the inside story with, with his patients. He said, no, they're these people babbling are not saying nothing.
Right.
And that's a, what it is, because that's why we dismiss. I was just telling Rick this morning of chasing off a drug prostitution transaction from the church grounds a couple of days ago, and the prostitute was just babbling and babbling and babbling. She was likely schizophrenic. That's why she's turning tricks, but she's not babbling nothing. There's
Right.
there's stuff there that she's processing, and she is processing, even as schizophrenic. So
Right. Yeah, there's a framework of
Yep.
schizophrenics, but it's incomprehensible to everyone except the schizophrenic.
Well, I'm not sure they're comprehending either. I mean, that's the
Yeah.
tragedy of the illness. So
Right.
So I have a quick observation. Maybe someone can correct me if they think I'm wrong, but I'm just wondering, so if you can't see without projecting, that feels a little bit hopeless to me for some reason. I'm not sure why.
I
And
think
I'm just wondering though, if asceticism is a way of getting around that. It's I don't know. What do you think?
I think it's sort of, I don't think it's hopeless. I think it's sort of like a beautiful thing. You constantly are, because you have this first impression and then you project all of these things onto someone. And it's a beautiful unfolding of yourself, of getting to know who the person really is rather than who you thought they were. It's kind of like a constant cycle that you're going through with everyone you meet, I guess.
yeah, and I agree. It's not hopeless. We don't, if we are, so we'll use this example of a schizophrenic. A schizophrenic is more deeply captive to the projections than someone without schizophrenia, let's say. And this is where, so part of what's happened in our culture is that we have made suffering synonymous with evil. And that's wrong. Suffering and evil are not synonymous. And again, going back to one of the most important conversations I think Peterson had was with Roger Scruton, because another way to understand that conversation, Peterson noted and Scruton agreed that when we experience dissonance, when we experience basically, sometimes when we suffer, it's because we are seeing through the projection. And that's why parenting always involves making your children suffer. You make and because you want, and this is where, if you're dealing with an addict, enabling basically is buffering the person from a suffering reality. Okay. So suffering is not evil. And so, yes, our projections are always with us, but suffering is not, suffering is go ahead.
This is part of my question, which is, it seems to me that most people don't want to let go of their initial projections.
Right.
And that because it involves pain.
Yes.
So how much of this is histrionics and how much of this is history? How much of this is imposing our projections onto history?
Yeah, because there's that too. How much, and these are things, we can't put a ruler up to suffering, and we can't do math on it. So no, you're exactly right. You're exactly right. But so in that way, suffering is often good news, because we are Yeah, projections are the kinds of things that you see, and even suffering itself isn't a guarantee of seeing through the projection. A lot of people suffer because of their projections. And, a lot of therapy is about trying to get rid of that level of suffering. So, but
Can I?
that's the human process. That's our story. But I wanted to come back and say something though to Sherry too, that asceticism is partly, what is asceticism about? It's about limiting the input. And by limiting the input, you are in some ways trying to combat the projection by amplifying it, which sounds strange, but I think that's essentially what asceticism is.
The
Is
suffering
it
that
is it then in
Good, Jerry.
is it in, is it in a sense then knowing that you are projecting?
Yes. Yes. And letting other kinds of suffering um, disrupt some of those projections and becoming aware of your projections. I mean, meditation, what is meditation? It's listening to, it's basically putting your projections in a room and say, okay. And then you begin to see what's in the room with you. Because the problem with projections is that we see through them and we use them to see, we don't see them. And so a lot of these practices in asceticism are trying to see the projections.
I I would push back on that a little bit because it seems to me that like in meditation, when you're looking at the projections, you're looking at them in a disassociated manner. So
Yep.
you're not engaging with them, but
Yep.
you're rather setting them to the side, and that would hopefully give you some form of new vision, right? Like you're not clouded by the projections.
You're
That you're
trying to
actually
get it. I think you're trying to get a sense of exactly what the prescription of your glasses is, so that maybe you can see through a little more clearly. Is that a metaphor that works? I don't know.
right. Yeah,
Can I,
So,
yeah.
I wanted to
I just want to
ask
get
some.
rid of the projections, Paul.
Uh, could I wanted to ask with the projections. Isn't part of the way that we get around the projections is by other people? So like that's why we
yep.
have 12 jurors instead of one. And the weakness of the projection is a weakness that makes us dependent on other people, and so
Yep.
that could also be a strength.
Yep. So many times these strengths and weaknesses are nested together. So, and again, all of the nesting that I talked about in terms of the Barfieldian dynamics and the Day of the Lord and these story arcs. So, not only do we have individual projections, but we have cultural projections and we have collective projections. So, there's a whole group of people, to use Scott Adams' good metaphor about two movies, even though when the storming of the Capitol by the Trump rally was an apocalyptic moment, people still saw multiple movies. And what happens with apocalyptic moments is that the the communally projected movies get disrupted to a degree or not, and it creates sort of a exorcistic unbinding in the population, so that people start shifting positions. People who never would go to church start going to church. People who do go to church stop going to church. People who vote for one political party are no longer enthusiastic about it. Others who would never vote for the other political party start to. It's tremendously disruptive because the communal projections, the projections of the principalities, if you will, the projections of the Voltrons are being dismantled. And so different people are joining together in different ways, and new projections are being created. The projections aren't evil in themselves, because you can't see the world without projections, because again, the world is too big to see. you need projections to see the world, because what your projections do is they compress and limit and focus, so that, again, if I have a very messy office, which I was telling to Rick this morning. If I would walk into my office and see everything, I couldn't take another step. I walk into my office and see what I'm looking for, because when I walk into my office, I think, okay, I've got to return this email, I've got to return this phone call, I've got to start working on my sermon, there's a video I want to make, there's a conversation I'm going to have. All of those things are things that I bring into the office with me and project onto my office, so that the salient parts of the office emerge. And so from there, you get to switch over to the Vervaekian things, you get your relevance realization. So we shouldn't talk about projections as if they're evil. They're simply necessary for small creatures like ourselves.
Hey, Paul.
Yeah.
I think I would contest, though, that there's a way of seeing the world that doesn't switch back and forth in this static binary mode, that is simultaneously both. Where the projections, where it's not like projections, but then there's something more real and something deeper. There's a way where I think you can function both. I get what you're saying. You need models to navigate the world, but there's a way I think you can perceive the world, which is like our apprehension of beauty, that is both objective and subjective at the same time.
Well, what does Carl call you, Luke? What is Carl's name for you?
Aspirin.
Oh, no, that's not nice. That's not nice. But that's just the kind of answer I'd expect you to say, Luke. But yeah, yes and no. So this is why we need Luke here, because this is what you bring to this, Luke. And so I'll have to think about that some more. But
I would say your vision is like a mosaic.
Yes.
That's what.
Yes. That's true.
And of which your models and abstractions and propositional knowing is, I would argue a relatively small part of that mosaic.
Yep.
But we have magnified it to be the main part of the mosaic, and in doing so, essentially broken down the communion that we have through language.
Ian McGilchrist. That's essentially his thesis. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. No, that's true. All right. Anybody else on this, or I'll head to the next question. Okay. Evan LC2R, reading Tom Holland's Dominion right now. He was reading it on December 18, 2020, and thinking about how the Book of Kings relates to the revolutions throughout history. He is right. Interested to hear any thoughts. Thanks. I mean, in many ways, your question gets at the relationship between Jesus and the Hebrew prophets. There was a little dust up on the Discord about separation of church and state, and Jacob was weighing in on the separation of church and state. Actually goes way back into the Bible, and I think Jacob is right, because there was the king, and there was the priests, and there were the prophets. And sometimes when you get the judges, which are like the pre-kings, judges are sort of, in a Barfieldian way, the union. You can look at someone like Moses. Moses was sort of prophet and king. Okay, God spoke through him. He sometimes functioned as a priest, so there was that aspect too. But then, Aaron was the priest, and Aaron's sons, Moses' brother. So it was quite, prophet, priest, and king were quite connected in Moses. Okay. And you get to Samuel. Samuel was kind of king and kind of prophet and kind of priest. And so when we look at these really important leaders in the Old Testament, where, especially before the monarchy, and they're inhabiting these things, you see some of that being put together. David eats the showbread that is only designated for the priest. David dances, so that slave girls can see his bare legs. David dances before the ark. He's king, but I think Pageau, talking about David as this trickster figure, and so then again, Pageau has been just so helpful in all of this, helping to see these patterns. They all come together in Christ, and Christ is prophet, priest, and king in a way that Moses isn't. And so when Christ says,
Paul,
if you
I
knew
have to do it. Melchizedek.
Melchizedek. Oh, that shadowy figure. Melchizedek. So all of this comes together in Christ. And notice what the apostle Paul does with Christ. Whereas Matthew, Mark, and Luke talk about the kingdom of heaven or the kingdom of God, John talks about eternal life. Paul talks about in Christ. And so Christ not only is the center where prophet, priest, and king all come together, but my kingdom is not ek. My kingdom is not from this world, he says to Pilate. And I remember noting N.T. Wright's frustration with the NIV. My kingdom is not of this world. No, 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 no. My kingdom is not from this world. Well, where is your kingdom from? And that's where you get, everything, if it's Caesar's, give it to Caesar. If it's God, give it to God. Well, what's Caesar's and what's God's? Well, is Jesus king of the Jews? How far does that kingdom reach? So all of these things come together. Now, Tom Holland catches in Dominion in the first chapters a little bit of the strain of that in the prophets. But, when I did my conversation with Tom on my channel, he was, when I kept wanting to make him talk theology, he kept blocking me. I'm not a theologian. I'm a historian. I'm not a theologian. I'm a historian. So fair enough. But I am a pastor. And so I'm not a theologian. I'm not a historian. I'm a pastor. That's a little bit different. And pastors are sort of prophet, priest, and king. We're little kings over our church, and we're little priests on Communion Sunday, and we're little prophets when we're preaching. So, and the Heidelberg Catechism will talk about these three offices of prophet, priest, and king. But we're mostly just little ones, and we're fragmented, and we're not like big ones like Moses or the final, ultimate, complete one like Christ. But then Christ is both an individual, and then we are all part of Christ. We are the body of Christ. Christ fills the universe. I mean, it's this, and this is why modernity struggles so much with Christianity, because this kind of modernists look at this language and, well, how can I understand this physically? Well, if you're only looking at physicality, you're not really looking. So, because you don't understand what looking and seeing are. And that sounded rather cryptic and esoteric. I'm sorry. But so, yeah, you're right to read Dominion and think about the Book of Kings and think about even before the Kings, like Samuel and Moses and, yes, Melchizedek. So, yeah, these things don't go away. And the reason the Bible continues to bear fruit is because, and Peterson saw this, which was an astounding thing. Peterson is the unauthorized exodus of the Gospel of Mark. Peterson is one of the magi who come to Bethlehem and lay gifts at the feet of the newborn king who must be rescued by his father, bringing him to Egypt. That is what Peterson did, because Peterson looked at the patterns and said, "Oh, I should bring gifts to the king." And that's, Peterson saw that in the Bible. That's an astounding thing. So, yeah, and Tom Holland is seeing it, and others are seeing it. And in some ways, their trip is like that of the Magi. And I got the Magi on my mind because I'm preaching about them Sunday. And I've said a bunch of things that I'm going to want to incorporate in my sermon, but don't have time. But there we are. Um, so yeah, you're right. Any comments on that from the voice chat?
The Christian anarchist in me just wants to point out that God didn't say nice thing about the institution of the king.
Yes, that's true. That's true. But yeah, God, we don't people people read the Bible and complain about what they see as tyranny. And I look at it and say, no, what you're really upset with is in fact the tolerance and liberty he affords us. I think it's true because I mean that whole passage in the book of Samuel where we want a king just like all the other nations, and Samuel's like, then God says to Samuel, "Hey, you're feeling a little underappreciated by the people who see your sons and say, "Oh no, how do you think I feel? Because I am their king." And so, yes, give them a king. And the people people who people who look at the Old Testament and just dismiss it as all of the ways that they are projecting onto it. I mean, just go to the Bible Project and or talk to anybody who knows that book and just see the artistry of it, of the storytelling, of the composition. I mean, it's so mysterious we often can't see its artistry, but Moses says, "Okay, here's your king. What are you looking for?" Well, they're projecting, and everything they're projecting looks just like Saul. And what do they get with Saul? They get a tyrant who is in fact even unable to handle the Philistine threat. And while they're shaking in fear of Saul, Samuel goes to the house of Jesse and says, "Bring out the sons." And good looking sons, tall, handsome, capable. And God says, "Nope, nope, nope." And hey, you got any more? I guess Jesse had a lot of sons. Yeah, but he's young. He's out in the field taking care of sheep. Get that one. And, what a book. What a book, the book of Samuel. What a book. But people, we don't have eyes to see. So, yeah, the office of the institution of king. One of my best moments in conversation with Jonathan Pageau is when he admitted to being a monarchist. I derived sheer joy from that. Wait till Prince Charles is king. Oh, what will Pageau say? Anyway, where are we at in terms of time? 11:28. Any questions that you can keep stacking them up, and we'll get through them eventually. All these questions here. Um,
Very interesting.
any questions that you want to get in voice wise?
I'll wait for the Magi video, I guess.
Okay. All right. Oh shoot, I scrolled. Now I lost my place. Oh, okay. Tristan I Stout. Greetings, Paul. Greetings, Tristan. I've been concerned that while I like listening to conversations about theology and psychology, I don't know how to begin integrating it into how I live my life. Very true. How can I talk to a 7-year-old relative about theology? Don't. They're 7. I'll tell you what to do in a minute. Or an atheist in law. Or a coworker. Currently, theology is a midnight snack that I eat in secret. Oh, what a lovely picture. Tell your 7-year-old stories. Share Bible stories. Those Bible stories, They are not accidental. And again, one of the great joys of Jordan Peterson was he saw that. Those stories are not accidental or incidental. These ancient stories, yeah, are they, you know, filled with gore and sex and horrible things? Yeah, but you know, a child doesn't see those stories like an adult does. And you see that in well-crafted children's stories, that there's always the two levels. You know, my one of my favorite children's stories around today is the original Incredibles. You know, is it Brad Bird? Is that his name? You know, really a good storyteller. And he also did The Iron Giant, another great story. You watch The Iron Giant and oh, there's two levels going on. There's lots of levels in the Bible stories. So for the 7-year-old, tell him good stories. Tell him good stories. He'll eat it up. He'll love it. And that's 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 what a 7-year-old needs. Atheist in law. Well, your original question was exactly right. You're the fact that you asked the question as you did. I don't know how to integrate it into how I live my life. Shows that you are already making progress in that effort because you are running into the suffering and pain that the person who the person who is not doing that at all doesn't know it because it is all projection. Well, I just do what the Bible says. Do you really? You know, and it was this moment when I was, you know, as a snot-nosed college kid debating some Bible and creation stuff with my to-be mother-in-law, who was a fundamentalist Baptist. And, you know, I say, you know, you've got a King James Bible, pull it out. Let's slow down and read it. And so she handed me her beloved King James Bible, and I noticed that she had corrected some of the text between Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. She had made the text fit the projection she had of how her science and Bible stuff worked. And I said, you know, you're really not supposed to correct the Bible. But we all do that by our projections. We're just not honest enough to pencil in things. So you're seeing that, oh my goodness, I've got all of these first drafts. I'm living out my projections. I'm living out my communal projections. And what I'm doing and learning is that there are far older patterns and there's dissonance between what I believe is true and right and you know what I'm living. You know, it's the same dissonance that it's New Year, not this New Year. It's New Year. I should really join a gym and I should really eat right. And I should really, you know, there's no accident that Exodus 90 came out around New Year's because I want to get my life straight. And actually, to actually say that means you're seeing something about your life. You know, it isn't fun to go to the doctor and say, well, you know, could really use to stand to lose 20 pounds. Um, That's not fun. Yeah, you know, your cholesterol's getting up there. Your blood pressure isn't where it should be. If you keep doing this, you're going to die. And we don't want to hear that, but it's true. So, no, keep, you know, if just asking the question, you are on the right road. And in terms of how to deal with your atheist in law, don't lead with your theology. Live your life as it's supposed to be. And in terms of talking to adults, you want to talk to children, tell them stories, play with them, love them, embrace them. You want to talk to adults, you're going to have to be a lot more crafty. First of all, your first command is love. Okay. You cannot make them into a Christian because you're, as you've just admitted, struggling to be a Christian yourself. So the first thing you should do is love them. And as you're loving them, hopefully you will build up enough rapport with them that you can have open and honest conversations with them. And then little by little, you might let them know what you think. And if in fact you've built a good relationship with them, if in fact you have credibility with them, they might not buy your thoughts. They might laugh at you. They might dismiss you. But if they respect you, you have planted seeds. And again, as the Apostle Paul says, we're none of us are capable of creating Christians. We plant seeds, we water, we till the soil, we play our little part. Why is it the Holy Spirit and only the Holy Spirit that brings regeneration and turning to Christ? Because all of us are too small and only the Holy Spirit is big enough. And the Holy Spirit's palate and menu has items on it that we don't possess. You shouldn't make your too many churches and pastors try to make people Christian by tyranny and suffering. This world will give them plenty of suffering. You know, love on them, talk to them, be honest with them. That's where a lot of the suffering and dissonance will come from. So, yeah. Or a coworker. Currently, theology is a midnight snack that I eat in secret. Well, continue to expand your diet of it and make it grow. But make it grow in the integration of your life. And, you know, what I like about the Exodus 90 thing that a lot of people are doing, even though I miss them in the Discord, is they are making sacrificial, hard, countercultural choices. And they're not out there being a nag or a moralist. They're saying, I'm going to fast. I'm going to be faithful in devotion. I'm going to practice some asceticism, and I'm going to listen to Jesus in Matthew 6, and I'm not going to do it and for the marketplace where people will see my suffering. No, I'm going to do it quietly. Nobody around me is even going to know I'm doing it. And maybe I'll tell some friends, say, hey, I'm not going to be around because I'm doing this thing, and I'll be back. I'm still your friend. Don't worry about me. Everything's fine. And so, you know, if you have a discipline of weekly fasting, don't let anybody know about it. That's what Jesus says. If you spend hours a day in prayer, probably hardly anybody should know it, because if you do it so that the world sees you, you've already received your reward. Do it in secret so that your Father in heaven, who sees what is done in secret, he'll reward you. So, great question. All right, how are we doing for time? Oh, pretty good. Ivan B. So in the Bridges of Meaning Discord, we have our open studio, and we're still trying to figure out how that room works, how much we chat, how much we don't chat, how much we just look at each other. Ivan's been in the open studio, and what I love about the open studio is that I now have a little window into these names and icons, and I love Ivan. I don't know exactly what he's doing, but they're doing art on a computer, and he's drawing, and that's what he's doing for work. And I think that's so cool. So thanks for asking a question, Ivan, and thanks for being in the open studio. Hi, Paul. As a pastor, when engaging with someone who is in pain, how do you know when to stand up straight and instill courage, and when to slump down and weep with those who weep? Oh, great question. A lot of that is just intuition, and you'll get it wrong. And with a lot of these things, wisdom, you gain wisdom by getting it wrong, which is because as a pastor, sometimes you wade in with a Bible verse because everybody expects you to go with a Bible verse or something. You wade in with a Bible verse or an answer, and just by the response for the person, you know that you probably just should have put your arm around them, kept quiet. And sometimes you put your arm around them and kept quiet, and they turn to you and say, Pastor, don't you have anything to say to me? And the thing is, different people need different things. And not only don't they have a name tag that says what they need, they also don't even themselves know what they need. And so as a Christian, I pray. I say, Lord, Anne Lamont, who's a writer, she says, the two prayers I pray most often are, help me, help me, help me, and thank you, thank you, thank you. I love that because it's so true. So as a pastor, so often you go into a situation and you know that it's a high voltage situation. Someone is dying. Someone has just suffered a terrible loss. The day of the Lord has come into someone's life, and their life has been ripped to shreds. and you're a pastor and you walk into this situation and they're looking at you like, I need Jesus right now, and Vander Clay, you're the best I got, so please don't screw it up. And as a pastor, you know that, and so it's terror inside, and so it's help me, help me, help me, and sometimes you get it right and sometimes you get it wrong. And wisdom is having done it a lot of times and gotten a lot right and gotten a lot wrong. And so somehow intuitive in that master side of your brain, not the emissary, the master side has learned it. So you come in and you tell them something. And this is so hard because sometimes there are times where you have to confront, and sometimes there are times when you have to let it slide, and you don't always get that right. And so it's, it's always funny when I read the comment section, when I let it slide, people are like, you should have confronted. And I don't have a problem with people telling me that, because they might be right. And sometimes I confronted, and no, you should have just, they needed you to listen. They needed you to love. But it takes tremendous wisdom to know when to do what. And so what's beneath the decision is care and love. So work on that side of it. And so sometimes you know, there'll be a time when, we have this cliche, tough love. Sometimes there'll be a time when you'll say no, when you'll tell the person, um, you really want me to bail you out right now, but probably you should spend a week in jail. Or you really want me to pay this bill right now, but probably you should spend a few days with the power out in your house. And maybe that will disrupt some of these patterns. Or other times when, here, you have $3 so you can go get a beer. Here, I'll pay your power bill for you. Do you get it right every time? No. But it's a great question, Ivan, but it's the right question. It's a good question. So lead with love, lead with care, gain wisdom, and in time, you'll get better at it. So it's a great question. I kind of feel bad for A. Adams Elias. You've never been here before. And so I see that you do have a question at the bottom. So I'm going to jump down to it because
You got it.
it's my
You got it
channel.
already.
Oh, I did it already? Okay, so I won't worry about it. Good. I try to be fair with y'all, but it is finally my channel. So when I want to do something, I'm going to do it.
Good job, Paul.
You're such a tyrant, Paul.
You're going to call me Saul? I am tall after all. I look kingly hiding amongst the baggage. All right. Matthew. Scotland, UK. Cool. Thanks for letting me know where you're from. That's helpful. Every little bit of information is helpful. Hi, Paul. I've heard you discuss your entry to the ministry in a very pragmatic terms rather than some Damascus Road experience. Would you say that as a Calvinist, pragmatic concerns are just as much the work of the sovereign God as light appearing in the sky, or would you prefer to say that calling is not necessary for pastorage? For pastorage, the first. You are exactly right that, in a sense, pragmatism and idealism meet in action, in the reunion of heaven and earth. So I can tell my story in a Damascus Road kind of way, and then someone will say, hey, wait a minute. Your father was a minister. Your grandfather was a minister. You have generations of living in parsonages. If you go and look at the Dutch Reform, there's the Greenway family, and there's your friend Scott Hoffman over there in Alameda. He's got pastors all over his family. My brother-in-law, who married my older sister, his father was a pastor. My family's dripping with pastors. Your Damascus Road experience, my foot. So it's always both. And that's And so, the bigger conversations, it's some of these dualisms that we're wrestling with. The God of redemption is the God of creation. Now, to get down to the calling thing, well, I'm a Protestant when it comes to that. I think if you're a rice farmer, or if you're you work for Intel, or if you're the chief, if you're the what title could I give Rick at Livingstone's? The chief. I don't know what title should I give you, Rick? I don't know. He's chief of something here. He's got to be, because we have so few of us. You're in charge, Rick. What is he in charge of? He's in charge of the live stream. So he's the director. He's the director of media ministries at Livingstone's. There you go, Rick. You're a director. Um, did God call Rick to direct this? Out of all the people I've met in the last 3 years, because I started making videos, of all the people who've been in and out of the meetups, or, you know, I'm me and Jacob here, we're both big on providence. God, and if you talk to Rick, if you get Rick to talk, Rick can tell you a story that is pretty amazing about how he came here. And he's a pretty shy guy. He's a pretty quiet guy, but God called Rick to be here. And we didn't know a pandemic was coming. But when the pandemic came, here's a guy, out of everyone who's listened to my videos, a guy who lives in Sacramento, who knows information technology, who knows networks, who has an interest in computers, he's the perfectionist. I am not. None of this would look as good as it does if Rick weren't here, because that's good. Look at my first videos. They're horrible. That's because I am who I am. But Rick is bugging me. You got to do something about the quality. The sound is a mess. The video is only passable. We have to do better. And out of everyone that we knew, God sent Rick. And Rick is here every Sunday. Rick is here every Friday to run this live stream. Rick and Joey and Tyler set up the Discord. People might see my face, and some of them think Rick is me, but Rick has talents I'll never have, and experiences I never have. And Rick has become a friend. And for me, that's a really cherished thing. And how on earth, and if you know anything about Rick's story, or how on earth did Rick get here? When you see this thing behind me, you should think of Rick, because Rick walked in on one Sunday morning and handed me something. It's like, I just started making videos, and this disruption in my life was a little dramatic. It hands me something and said, "This is for you." I'm thinking, who is this guy? I've never been in church before, but here I am. I thought, oh no. Oh no. he's gonna once he gets to know me a little bit better, he's gonna fly out of this place. But God brought Rick. And when the pandemic hit, and when we had to stream things, Rick's like, oh, I got some ideas. I got some ideas of how we can do this. And that's not accidental. That's providence, and it's calling. Now, is Rick on his way to being ordained as the minister of the word in the Christian Reformed Church? I, I think he's deeply skeptical of such an idea. I don't know that Rick has to be ordained as a minister of the word in the Christian Reformed Church to be called by God to do what God calls him to do. And I'm enough of a Protestant that I say, that some of the Catholics are going to say, we believe that too. So you Protestants, you never get us right. And maybe that's right too. But I think God knows Rick by name and has called Rick. And, Rick wasn't sitting at his home and a light came on and God said, "Go to Living Stones, get ready for the pandemic." You know, help the weird pastor and his slovenly technical ways and make the video and sound better. He didn't say any of those things. God worked through, you know, everything that was Rick up until that point to bring us to this point. And what God does with us, who knows? But that's the whole thing about faith. I trust him. So yeah, I can tell Rick's story, which I won't do because it's his story to tell, but I can tell Rick's story in very pragmatic terms, just like I can tell mine. Or I just kind of told Rick's story in a very Damascus Road way. They're both true. And that's what being a recovering cynic should be able to allow you to do. So great question, Matt. Any of the rest of you, anybody else called to be here? I think a lot of you are called to be here, and I've told you so.
I think so.
Yeah.
One thought that I had just while you were talking was just about how, and speaking of the name Paul, even I was thinking about how a Christian's desire to love one's enemies is essentially like the example of Paul being freed from jail. I think it was Paul, and he and whoever was with him were the doors, the chains dropped, the doors open, they could have walked out of there, but he saved both the jailer and the those that were in jail. And I don't know, there's something about that strikes me, that you want to save the POWs and the guards that have been captured by a terrible ideology.
Right.
Ideally, both are saved. It might be the method and means or the implications are different, but ultimately you want them all to walk free and walk in the light.
Yep. I agree. Well said. Well said. I know a bunch of you are called to be here because um, it's happening. To pull out the meme and the Bridges of Meming channel, it's happening. It really is, and I am deeply touched by what all of you are doing. And I know, some of you say, "Hey, I'm not even a Christian. I don't believe in God." Okay, I do. I think he's working through you. You can laugh and dismiss me and call me crazy if you want. Don't be offended because it's actually a great compliment. But I I think what's going on in this little corner of the internet is a really special thing. I think we should value it now because it won't last forever because these things never do. Just like, the first Jordan Peterson wave. It was a wave. It went through. It was a pattern. It was a vibration, however you want to talk about it. But this won't last forever. There'll be bad times. There'll be times of falling apart. There always are. And but let's enjoy the grace that we've been given now, and thank God for it. That's, again, if you don't believe in God, just be grateful generically, and and do whatever you can. So how much time we got? 10 minutes. Brody, in a recent article on Douglas Murray, Esther O'Reilly, who's that? Esther O'Reilly said this, and yet Murray fails to persuade the socially conservative reader that this train was designed with brake systems in the first place. He writes as if there is or was a moderate middle ground in the culture war. But what if it's been a zero-sum game all along? Esther. She knows I love her. So it made me think of others such as Helen Pluckrose, James Lindsay, now even Richard Dawkins, who was aghast that modernity and Enlightenment values are not holding. Yeah, that's the projection and the dissonance and the suffering, isn't it? That these cherished system, that's when your theology doesn't go far enough, or your church group dies, or your church tradition loses the fight and succumbs to Islam through a major part of the world. Yeah, it's the day of the Lord comes, and the day of the Lord looks like Jesus hanging on a cross sometimes. Other times it looks like Jesus coming out of the tomb. So, what are your thoughts on this quote? Well, Esther, of course, she always cringes when I call her an evangelical, but no, I'm an English evangelical. I'm a real evangelical, but she's she's she is who she is, and there's a fair amount, let me say it this way, there's a fair amount of antithesis in Esther, as there is in me, as there is in many of us, but the antithetical, where Esther O'Reilly wants to see Douglas Murray become a Christian, and so do I. And so Esther is pulling on some of the subtle points and making, moving on those points. And hey, I agree with Esther. But like I said before, the Holy Spirit, the God of creation, is the God of redemption. And so that God would use, I mean, for pity's sake, Cyrus, someone recently, I think it was on Twitter, someone recently, someone who gets irritated sometimes when I troll or poke at people a little bit. I do it just a little. There are much better trolls under the bridge than I am. There's another little meme for us trolls that live under the bridges of meaning. Someone was, snarking at me that, Cyrus the Great was called a Messiah. God's anointed to have the temple rebuilt. Cyrus the Great had plenty of blood on his hands. So yeah, that's why I say people read the Bible and say, "Oh, God is a petty tyrant who is too uptight about little transgressions." And I think, yeah, he's way more serious about tiny transgressions than we are. He's also way more tolerant and liberal than even the most lawless person among us. What are you saying? God is lawless? No. I just said that he is, in fact, and this is what comes through in the Sermon on the Mount. He's more demanding than we think he should be. He's also more, what's the right word? He takes bigger risks than we think he should take. He uses people that we think shouldn't be used. Moses is a murderer. David is not only an adulterer, he has the husband of his partner in adultery murdered, and he covers it up. That's why Nathan, the prophet, comes into the king's court and says, "You are that man." And yet he is a man after God's own heart. I mean, this is the God of the Bible. He is both more demanding than we think he should be, and he is, see, I don't have the other word that should match to it yet. He takes bigger risks. He's more forgiving. He's more gracious. He's more liberal. He's more generous than we think is appropriate or responsible. And well, why would you think that about a God of this world? Because that's what creation says too. I was just thinking this morning, nature is both more unequal. Nature is hardly egalitarian because, look at ants and lions. There's very little that's equal about nature. Me and LeBron James, LeBron James, me playing basketball with LeBron James, yeah, no contest. And he was born with so many of those gifts that I was not. But nature is also tremendously meritocratic. It's this relevance realization competition. Nature is also terribly sometimes unjust. Accidents happen, the tower falls. And what does Jesus have to say about the tower falling? So the reason the Bible is credible is not because, as some would like, God is some benevolent grandfather or you know, Aslan is not a tame lion. He is free. And God does things that we look at and say, I've got real questions about that. Yeah, Abraham had questions and brought it to him. Job had questions. You know, these are saints of the Bible. They had questions, and if you say you don't have any questions, you're not paying attention. But that's the way it is. And so God using Douglas Murray and Esther O'Reilly and Helen Pluckrose and James Lindsay and Richard Dawkins and Donald Trump and Barack Obama and Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi and um, McConnell and his wife and God using all of this in order to achieve his glory. Boy, Paul, you sound like John Piper. God using John Piper, God using all of this to achieve his glory, to make this story into the greatest story ever imagined. And all of us as little sub-creative story makers beneath us. So that's, yeah, God is using Douglas Murray. God is using Kendi, Ibram X. Kendi. God is using the wokesters. God is using the anti-wokers. God is using all over the place to achieve his glory and to achieve the next story, the next chapter of the story, which, you know, part of why I'm a Christian minister is I want to be a part of that next chapter. And what we're doing right now is part of the writing of that next chapter. And I want to be there. I want to be there. And Esther would hear that and say, yeah, that's right. You have no idea what answering this question has given me in terms of Esther is going to write me about this, and I'm going to be called to account for this answer. Trust me, I will. And some of you are chuckling because you know it's true, but you know, I have a one. Rick is saying, "Yep, you are, Paul, you are." But I think the world of Esther. Esther is brilliant. She's a prodigy. Um, she's going to do great things in this world. I believe it. And maybe these will be great things that will be public things, or maybe these will be great things that none of us will know much about, because the hand that rocks the cradle rules the world. So who knows where any of this is going. But I'm gonna mark that one as the last question I answered. I don't know. I'll try to remember if that was the last question or the first question. Maybe I'll put 2 markings, so I'll maybe remember. Okay. So, well, we just got a couple of minutes. Any closing comments by anybody in the voice chat room? Anyone wants to make?
I was just gonna say that it's like God is the guy that jumps out of the airplane, and you're like, "What in the world are you doing?" He's like, "Oh yeah, he has a parachute," but most of the time we don't see that, or we for some reason don't expect it, or some are predisposed to not expect it.
Yeah. And our real issue is not so much. See, what we want is, I want to be able to know and to see, so potentially to wield and control. And God says, no, what you need to do is trust me. That's what you need to do. You need to trust me. And so then you start to begin to trust God, and God says, good, I'm going to mess things up a little bit more. Do you still trust me? You know, it's like when you were first learning to swim and you were at a swimming pool, and you were that toddler shivering on the side of the pool, and your daddy's with his arms out and saying, jump. And then you jump and you go in the water and he picks you up, and he takes a step back and says, all right, jump. And the kid looks like, you're not where you were. No, I'm not. Jump. And you know, you might swallow some water. You might have that moment of panic underneath. But the crazy thing about Christianity is it says that God jumped first, and all of us jumpers jump after him. And you say, yeah, but you know, Christians die. Yeah. And again, this is why I believe death is not the end of the story. Just like Gandalf in Lord of the Rings, in the movie even. So no, this is not the end of the story. It's an important story, but we're setting up for the next story too. And God is good, so trust him. So there, I've fulfilled my duty as a Christian minister. Look at that. What do you say, Rick? Is that a good way to land the plane? Rick says it's a good way to land the plane. So thank you all for watching. Thank you for the live stream. Thank you for the super chat. Wow, Ike, you were the first super chat. So thank you for that. And thank you also for, was it Alex that had the other super chat? I don't know how these super chats work. I was just in my YouTube studio and it said, turn on super chat. So I said, okay, I turned it on and what have you, there it was. So thank you all in the chat, Alex. So, we have our YouTube protocols. I should abide by some of them as well. But thank you all for gathering in the Bridges Meeting Discord. And thank you for all that you do. Thank you for those who contributed to Livingstone's church this year. Your donations to the church help keep me doing this. Thank you for those of you who contribute to Patreon or the other ways that you've, made this happen. Thank you for tolerating the cursed YouTube ads. So, thank you all. And Lord willing, we'll do it again next week. And maybe I'll be able to get through a few more questions and answers. There